First off, really good presentations today, really good different depth and breadth of what, well, we can't even get the name right. Is it ZTNA? Is it ZTA? Is it 2.0, 1.0? What is it? And we've done ourselves a disservice as an industry, honestly. Because how many people have gone up to a customer and said, we're ZTNA, and the customer went like this? And that's because we've taken a terminology, an SP. What does the SP and NIST stand for? NIST SP is special what? Publication. It's not a standard. It's not a framework of, if you do these controls like in 853 other things, you were sort of just stuck to exactly what it is, a publication. And so people have taken this and said, you know, it's great, it's not helping me, you're making me buy more technology, you're pushing everything I have to the cloud. And cloud is a huge component of this. But the key piece of the cloud is that, what really is the cloud? Is it in somebody else's data center? And part of this RFI that we had here to discuss was literally take that RFI, define SP 800-207, which, by the way, I've talked to a lot of people at shows, and they said, we do ZTNA, and I said 800-207, and they're like, I'm not sure. Or they nod at you, because they have no reference to what 800-207, ZTNA, ZTA, or any of the alphabet soup of acronyms even is. And so, realistically, it is our job as security practitioners and professionals to define what these memorandums and publications mean. So what we're really going to talk about here is when we talk about the cloud, many entities can't move their things out. And when we looked at that RFI, there was OT and SCADA in there. If we flip the reverse of CIA, which is what IT is about, and we look at the other side, it becomes AIC for the OT individuals. Ask them how many people feel their safety systems in the cloud feel comfortable. Ask them how not real time things can be in the cloud for them to access them. And so what we've done is we've said the evolution architecture is great. It's moving forward. We all need to move forward to basically reduce our services, reduce our costs, increase our value, and basically with worker shortages and other things going on, really zero in on, we can do a unified approach. That's great, but that doesn't mean you leave out the old. And it doesn't mean you have to change the old all the time. So we're going to go through the real-world ZTA approach, implementing it for identity-based connectivity. And yes, when we're talking identities here, if you look at the world today, we are all digital. You hold a phone in your hand, that's where everybody lives. Okay? That is your digital identity. In the IT world, in the OT world, and in IoT, which I call the Internet of Threats, not the Internet of Things, everything has an identity to it. Good, bad, indifferent. You have known good, you have good, and then you have the unknown in the middle. And so when we're talking here right now about integrity, I look around the room here with people, I don't know the integrity of any of you. I may have talked to some of you, but do I know your integrity? Do I know your value? Do I know if you're good, ungood, or unknown? And so that's what integrity really comes into here, is figuring that out. Well, it has to be real time. So there's two terms up here that my company likes to use, modernization and federation of identity. I'll get into those. And then the architecture of the architecture and how we accomplish these goals. So according to the official standard, because I've seen multiple pieces, parts, and subsets pulled in today to say, this is what we interpret it as. Okay? How many of you have looked at a picture online and somebody said, isn't that a beautiful bird flying? And somebody turns around and says, guess what? I turned it sideways and I see a dog's head. And then you look at it and you can never unsee the dog's head. Because all of a sudden you've seen that vision and you're like, you're right. So when you get an interpretation on something from somebody else, all of a sudden that starts to build on what you think it is. And we've heard a lot of interpretations today of a special publication, to be honest with you, because Nobody takes zero trust and says, you must make 853 happen like many industries do, or ISO. The problem is we had an executive order that turned around and said, we're going to do this, that. We're going to push this down. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just something we have to do. We have to make it good. And when you talk to a lot of organizations, they say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do change. I want to check box on audit because it's the simple thing. It's done to what I interpret it as. So we're going to discuss all these things here. The memorandum, you all really know. It says that enterprise managed accounts. I've had people argue with me, what does the word enterprise mean? Because when they think about it, you just had the oil and gas industry that had a breach. And all of a sudden, well, we have to do MFA for everything but a service level account. Now you have people arguing, what's a service level account? So the interpretation of what enterprise is, what that involves, is that your cloud? Is that your on-premise? Is it both together? Where does that boundary lie? And what they want is everything. That's a scary word in security because how many times in life when you say, give me everything, do you really get everything? And can you solve for everything? In security, we solve for finite problems. That's why we have a proliferation of point products out there now. Everybody's got a solution to do one thing. Even here in this talk today, we've talked about zero trust, and everybody has a segment of what they do because they say, we can't do everything. Well, if I don't do everything and he doesn't do everything, how are we going to solve everything? So this is the catch-all to say, we've had issues, we're trying to solve it, let's take every account, every asset, everything that we call a resource, put it together and say, we're going to solve for this, and that'll be simple because we have a memorandum, we have an executive order, and we have a special publication on that. The key part here is devices that federal staff use to do their jobs are consistently tracked and monitored. Are they all today? I know many entities that I've gone to and they are not tracked and monitored. I know many entities that can't even find all of their assets. So this is a great point to start and say we're putting these down, but this is prescriptive, meaning do this and you'll feel better. It's not proscriptive, which says, how do I validate you've done this? And so when we look at this, this is security posture of a device, deeply important. We have people out there that are going to give us that in the ZTA space, okay? We have the component here that are isolated from each other, and network traffic flowing between them is reliably encrypted. We've had people talk about microsegmentation today. There's great pieces of that in the space. Okay? But when you get down to this, how many people have been in networks where everything on the back end is flat because it's easy to get to? And then you try to pull it apart and they go, well, you can't do that because I don't know what system's talking to what system. So when you look and you say, well, if I'm trying to do everything, and yet the first 2 points right here tell me that these aren't able or capably done right now, how can I do everything? It's foundationally that we're broken. And yet now we want to say, everybody pick up and move to this new wonderful framework. How many people have had to migrate a database from an Oracle to an IBM? And the first thing you think is, oh, it's just data. That becomes the worst project in the world because it's like, well, what is the data? Where does it reside? How do we manage the data? What do we do when we get it there? Do we keep the data the same? It's like trying to clean out your junk drawer at home. How many people sit down and say they're going to do that? Because by the time they're done 2 minutes in, they're like, forget this, I'll just shut the drawer and pretend it doesn't exist. And that's the reality of it, is that what we're really trying to do here with ZTA as a thought model and as a model for the government that have put in and businesses is really say, we want to take all the components that everybody's talked about here today, pull them together and give you something functional. And so at Cyolo, what we're doing is we're saying, you know what? We're going to give you a lot of these things built into the platform, but our platform is fully extensible API, so we can integrate with anybody. And so when you look at things here that says identity, access and controls, MFA, just a little FYI, MFA was recently found to be not as secure as MFA everybody thought it was. Little FYI, one of the large providers of passwords that was storage out there that I thought that would be great was also recently breached. So MFA, multi-failure architecture points, depending on how you implement it. All these things have good principles to them. It's how we implement them for customers and for entities out there. And without secure enterprise managed identity systems, attackers can gain footholds. We've heard lateral movement. We've heard about things that are out there for 200 plus days. You know, I always tell people when they say, what's a new baseline? I tell people, you know, the moment your audit ends, you know audit starts. But in theory, what happens in an audit? Everybody goes out and 3 months beforehand, I got to stop projects, I got to grab all this data out here and make it up and fudge it so that the auditor goes on a checkbox. And then you know the auditor's only going to go with certain things on your audit, so it says, I don't have to worry about this year. What about if an auditor came in and said, oh, this year I'm going to check this, and you're like, wait, that's not how the rules go. So get back to everything. Are we truly doing anything? So a lot of people are afraid of these memorandums, ZTA, they're going to them, but how? Well, here's another one, improving remediation capabilities. We've had people talk that SIM, and I've seen it SEIM, I've seen it SIEM, so to me at this point it's 4 letters. Just like as I told Tim here, I said I've had people come up to me and I've been talking about soup, and they're like, well, what type? And I'm like, SEWP or SOUP? You know, one you're buying a can, one's just part of the government alphabet. So when you look at this down here, the first S is what? Security. That's why people think that a SIM is your security platform. It's not. It's just your right of boom evidence thing that you hope you have everything there, so when something happens, people turn around and say, gee, SIM saved me now. It doesn't save anybody. It's just a log aggregation facility for an environment, which when you start to say, what about network time protocol? What about other things? They're like, what's that? And I'm like, that's great. Here we have the core components, as you know. And everybody's talked about the core components here. There's your industry compliance, there's your threat intelligence, there's your activity logs. If anybody can define for me what activity logs are, because many systems, if you look at them, they don't normalize as log in, log out. Are they time-stamped? Anything else? If you look at your data access policy, now we have to classify and define our data, because that's part of what the data access is who can get to it, when, where, and how. And then you look at PKI, ID management, all coming into your engines, driving down to a basically policy enforcement point, where in the middle, you have an untrusted system, and then you have a trusted on the other side. Where we come from identity is, we're not looking to change this. We're looking to have the pieces flow through us. And what we do is we take that piece in the middle, and if you divide a line down the middle of it, on the front end of our platform, the Cyolo architecture, within your environment, we put a component, software-based, just as a premise. It's outbound 443. So we've heard that today where people said, you know, hey, we're outbound, you know, here's the traffic, you're gonna have to find us, that's great. It's on the back side, over here towards the enterprise resource, where you look and you say, how do I protect that? Because ZTA was really made to say, I don't trust this side, and yet that diagram there, you don't trust that side, because what we've said is, if we don't have all the logging, if we don't know everything, if we can't track your data and anything coming in there, can that truly be trusted either? You trust it based on it's mine. If you work with somebody, do you trust them? Yeah, I work with them. How far does that trust go? So we have a real complex problem here that we're trying to tell people we solve. And we can solve this if we just lay some foundational principles down. And those foundational principles really come from, if you take all the segments of what we're doing in ZTA here and look at them individually and say, what component does what? Because remember, nobody does everything. What we've come up with is the identity piece of this proposal. And so what we have here, and I'll bring the whole thing up because I hate these type of click, click, click things. We're not a VPN. But in a lot of the environments, especially in the federal government, the VPN was supposed to be the solution until you had to add all these pieces to it. And by the way, you had split tunneling, and then you could drive a truck through it. But it's a down and dirty way for people to get through, just like a jump host is, into environments. So I've worked in the government space, I've audited the government space, I've done enough in the business world on both sides to realize that their answer is we'll put something in the middle for someone to get to. And that's external users. Internal users, they generally don't stop a lot of internal users because they need the resource. I'm not going to put a firewall after firewall because the same ports on 2 firewalls open doesn't solve the problem. So why put them there except to give the firewall vendor more money? But now with technologies like ZTA and identity-based access and things like that, we can actually do some of the things that people here were talking about today. Like you're talking about getting a resource to somebody. You're talking about how do we check microsegmentation and things like that. We can implement with our platform geofencing and other technologies. So you can have a tablet, you can't walk outside the room or it says goodbye, you're not working. So we can do a lot of things on the user identity, on the application identity. And this all comes down to the evolution. We all know that we want to do traffic encryption, secure remote access. That's come across from everywhere. We all know that we want to do visibility, accountability, and control. They call that the audit trail. That's the right of boom side of things. These also tie into the left of boom, where now you're doing things to look at that traffic to see what's going on at this real state, this moment in time. Prior to this state, was that asset compromised? How old is that credential? Other things. So there's visibility and stuff through the entire process. It's application access, not network access. Remember back here, this big VPN part back here? That gives you the network. Most people, you opened it up, you went in, got to your jump host or wherever it was, and you went. And then cloud scalability with on-premise manageability. So what does this mean? A lot of people out there, and I was just at a conference where the person from a 3-letter company I won't mention was walking around saying nobody here likes us. And I'm like, well, you're trying to tell them to put everything in the cloud. And they came and said, we're thinking about going on-premise now because people are concerned about that A in AIC on the OT side, and they're worried about the C on the IT side of having a problem. How do you get that data to come together? And so what we're saying is, if we can take your on-premises applications, because people still have mainframes. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but TN3270, I had a guy ask me, what does the TN stand for? And I said, you tell me. And he goes, well, what does the 3270 stand for? And I said, if you could figure that part out, I said, I'll tell you what TN means. I still think he's thinking on it, honestly. But if we can do this for all your existing applications and give you that ZTA architecture, wouldn't that make sense? Because now you can have your cloud, your hybrid cloud. What about if you can get to those places nobody can get you right now? What about if you can get to places that oil fields, wind turbines, military munitions dumps, whatever they are, they're in the middle of anywhere. That's possible. And that's possible basically when we take the tenets of ZTA with identity-based access control and what we're doing with our platform. Any questions so far? Or great. So as you can see, the whole goal, there's that everything word, connect everything. Increase operation productivity, reduce the risk of a breach. The funny part is, I always look at these like a roller coaster, like the anticipation of when you're going up, like this is gonna be great, and then when you start to go down, everybody screams because, oh my God, this wasn't what I thought it was. Isn't that what we do in security? It's great going up, and it's, wow, it's gonna be awesome, and then the down ride of the incident or the event is like, oh my God, I wanna get off this ride. So it's that reality. So how do we do this? Well, this actually is what our architecture is, combining everything. We're taking the users up here. Your employees, R&D, third parties, executives, you can tell this is done by an engineering-minded company because R&D winds up in there because they're the important users right next to the employees and the executives. And their locations. Now this is key. Offices, what we have one person in our company called the carpet floor. And then the SCADA part was the graded floor. But yet, 80% of the companies we talk to, when you say, do you have manufacturing, do you have supply chain, do you have inventory and stuff, it's like, oh yeah, and now you bring in that IoT, and that IIoT and the MIoT, and I'm waiting for ZIoT, because that would be means we've gotten to the last of those devices. But all those devices are now in buildings and facilities. And so we call that, as a catch-all phrase, the graded floor. And in this example we were given here, how would you guys turn around and get to the thermostats in this building? I can tell you I was at one of the military bases in Maryland, where during COVID, they couldn't get to the thermostats. The buildings were set for when people lived in the buildings, when it was occupied. They had to get there and manage those. We can do that. The problem now is, do we have the people that understand how to do that? And do they trust that it can be done securely? Then we have the devices which are managed and unmanaged. You have a lot of people that, you know, I don't have to tell you how many unmanaged devices I find out there. And then your resources out here. Your legacy, your 3270, your IT, your OT, and anything else that's in here. And then you have your applications. So when you pull this all together, this is the ecosystem of a complex environment today. In the old days, the environment was draw users in a box, draw your client server in the middle, maybe throw your policies coming down, or that was generally a firewall on the one side and policy was an afterthought. And then you had just a stated architecture. It was, I know my network. I know he's coming from here to there. I know he's going to be sitting here at this workstation. I'll get a MAC address. Touchdown, I'm good. All these pieces can be anywhere, literally. And so what we have taken is this wonderful slide here and said, here's everything that's out there. God, I should give this to my kids. They'd watch it for hours. But the reality is as this fills out, are these sources true? And all the customers you talk to, are they all doing these type of things? This is reality right here. You have all your users and directories. You have your web apps. You have your internal, your terminals, your VPN still, your privileged access. And you have all these different roles over here coming through these type of devices right here, going to these type of resources. That was that square slide before this that looked all different until you start putting a line through it and you go, wow, they all really are connected together. So if we are doing this to ourselves to get things to where people need to be, Zero Trust is trying to say, let's collapse that down. Because you want that one choke point. Because remember that policy engine that had one square, and it said, here comes this side from the untrusted, and here goes this side to the trusted? Where do you put that here? This, we created ourselves. Because this gets back to, we created so many technology solutions to solve problems with point products that didn't come together. Ergo now, why we're going to Zero Trust to say, we shrink it all back down and go to the cloud and a unified architecture, modelistically. What we do is we do the identity portion. Now, I don't take the identity as in just the user. I take the identity of, on this side, we can do device management. We have the ability to look at certificates. We have the ability to take other application vendors that will do it far better than we ever will. Okay? I'm not going to go out tomorrow and say to my company, go build a SIM. Why would you do that? But this is where best of breed knowledge comes together and says, I don't want to build another point product. I don't want to rip and replace your world. But we have to control this. We have to control the managed, right? There's a product out there to do that. We can integrate with those. We have all the users out here. We're looking and saying, right now, our platform, and many of them are web browser based. We know they know how to use a web browser. So if they have this component that can be on a tablet, phone, computer, whatever it is, and we can get them here, we have the access part for them somewhat solved. I mean, you don't call from home and say, boss, my home internet's down, come fix it, do you? It's like, no, you should know how to do your own internet. You're a user, you should know how to use a browser. whether that's one of these two devices, to get into the infrastructure and then to access our resources. So you're leaving this part here to, and many times, organizations that say, if I don't manage that device, it saves me money. The federal government even has people that have unmanaged devices, as you know, in certain areas, because of cost. But yet, we take this side and we say, okay, we fairly know that. Over here is where we look and we say, who owns these? When was the last time you called one of your cloud providers and said, I had an incident, I need your logs? And they said, oh, sure, we'll get those right over to you. That's where some people turn around and say, not only can I put them in the cloud because of what they are, I don't want to put them in the cloud because somebody else is now managing, maintaining, and I lose that control. So what we do for people is say, you can do this, you can do this, you can have your data centers, you can have your legacy applications, all of your resources over here, and we're not going to ask you to change your infrastructure. Do we trust everything back up here like the ZT model shows? No, but show of hands, how many people here trust everything in their environment at this point? Okay, so we have untrusted trust. What we do is we say we're going to be the identity piece in the middle here and say, we'll let you have the tools back here that work best for your technology and best in your environment, that your people understand. We're going to take users over here that know how to log in with a browser and get there. We're going to come right here and say there is ways to manage the devices. And we're going to bring them all together in one easy-to-use architecture that now allows you to basically achieve that one gateway through. Because we don't want to go back to the prior slide where all the lines were all over the place. So how do we do this? Well, the nice part about it is that we can take your Active Directory, we can take your on-premise data access repositories, usernames, passwords that people have in applications, that people have in the OT world, because OT is part of this, and say, you know, I had a guy say to me, you know, the solution to OT is put an AD in. And I was like, you mean the people that don't like to talk to the IT people? And the people that'll say, then the IT guy said, give me a hole in so I can patch this? That's not going to happen. So they do have to have credentialing. That's a given. Local passwords. Applications out there that still have the password embedded in it, you can't change it. Don't tell me it's not just in the industrial world. I can go to a million systems on the IT side. In fact, you know, I was going to actually say to my friend, why don't we just make the login password, because then people get confused and they'll say, well, wait, why is it password twice? It should be admin and then password. Just because people think logically that if it's broken and I can't fix it, I got to get rid of it. That's not true. Fragmented cloud integration or not. How many people have multiple clouds? So we've seen some presentations that say you have to go to our cloud now. Why? I'm not here to spend the federal government's money and say you have to change everything you've spent, because I'm a taxpayer. I'm here to say, take what you have spent and let's find a way to make it work. And so what we can do is we can retrofit all the applications with MFA. MFA is built into our platform. We can also use other people's MFA platforms out there. So now I've got the ability to use our MFA, another person's MFA, whatever you have to make this work. And we can do SSO for all identities. The interesting part about this is that when you look at, as I said, that pipeline breach, the government came out now and said you have to do multi-factor for everything but a service level account. How do you do that if it's a shared service level account? Guess what? We can do that, and we can audit it as an individualized account. No need to upgrade the applications. That's a given because we're not touching your applications. Remember, if you look at that policy box in the middle, we are basically a reverse proxy. And we've heard that a couple times today. We sit in the middle and we take this user here, this resource here, and what we do is we enact a policy to say, I'm going to check the user on this side, make sure that there's factors that line up. I'm going to take the applications and resources on this side, make sure there's things you can do to those applications and limit those. And there's a myriad of list of limits that can be done. And we're going to sit in the middle and now broker on behalf of. And so we don't need to upgrade your applications. And we can take, because your infrastructure is staying the same, and if we're looking right now, the government's moving to ZTA, how many people are going to miss the deadline? How many entities out there? Oh, exactly. Why? Because they don't have the people, don't have the resources, they have to retrofit, they have to try to get rid of. When I was doing FedRAMP and the company I was with was going to lose their authorization, it was because of our sponsor, because they had one database that sat in our boundary and they couldn't upgrade or change it. And I was like, what are you going to do with it? Nothing. I'm like, okay, it's catch-22, you're going to lose the authorization unless you fix it. Well, we can't fix it, so help us solve it. You can't do that. But being able to do things here like painful apps first, get to those and say, you're not going to be able to do the entire ZTA thing right away. We'll deal with the urgent apps because we're not changing it. We'll help you identify the critical apps out there. And most organizations hopefully should know those, because if not, how's your incident response plan and business continuity going to work? So those have to be there. And then we create the policies that can help those high-risk applications there. So you have a user that comes in from home, as an example. He wants to get to a resource internally after 4 o'clock on a Friday. You know what? We can put a policy right in the middle of that that says after 4 o'clock, he can be supervised or recorded, can't do file upload and download, doesn't even have the username and password to the resource, and he has to tie into your ticketing like ServiceNow or something to get those credentials turned on, off, other things. I've now given you the ability to get to those applications now, to front them without changing them. And now, the other part is because on the front end, we're through TLS 443, SSL, as some people still say to me, and I'm not getting into the acronym soup. Secure connectivity to all the apps. This is on the front end. On the back end, once again, if you're going to TN 3270 or something on a mainframe, you know, good luck, but we hope you have that point term defense in depth back there, which to me means you have a functional clue of what your network and infrastructure and architecture looks like. Secure identity-based remote access. Once again, with MFA built in, we can even do things in air-gapped environments where you do not even need to go out to the cloud or any other resource to multi-factor. We've heard YubiKeys, QR codes, things like that. You literally can take, and I'm just saying this from, everybody says this isn't doable, I'm saying this is doable. Vendors in this room can help you with a lot of components that we don't do, but we can help you with these things to build this for you, because now I can take a code, scan it on a phone, and the other individual company here that had the facial recognition, add that piece in, because we're fully open on the back end for the API, and you have totally air-gapped MFA in your environment. I'm getting out to rigs and sea locations that I can't disclose that literally they can MFA, have somebody supervise, watch what's going on, all through low-RAN and other satellite type links out there, just through this without changing anything. So if Zero Trust is truly about multi-factor, policy enforcement, getting the resources without changing things, and adding in that cloud component and fixing your on-premise things, then we can do all these right here in the identity-based access. So how does this all work? I love the Holiday Inn Express type logo here, because this is an old doorknob. And if you think about your hotel key, when you go to a hotel, the older ones, you had to first you put the key in to twist it in the old days. Then they changed the doorknob. Then they turned around and said, okay, we're going to have the card that slides down in the door. Now we want to get rid of the cards. Now we will basically go to the door and still use your phone, right? Until the phone doesn't work, and then you have to go back to the card so somebody can get and change the batteries on the back side of the door, which, by the way, that's where the little module is, in case you've never noticed. But we're taking that doorknob and saying, look, no reason to change the doorknob. What we're going to do is we're going to take and say, don't do this. Don't rip and replace everything you have out here, okay? Because you want to be at this. Everybody wants a Ring doorbell till it finds them doing stupid things in front of their house, and your wife's like, don't ever do that again. So then you find a way to sort of turn off the doorbell. But what you want to do is you want to take this existing doorbell and basically retrofit it. And so remember I said, if you have MFA already in certain applications, if you have MFA on certain resources, if you have SSO, whatever you have, that's great. We can integrate because we will help you get to those other pieces, and then the ones you don't, we can overlay those right here. And that's why the CEO of our company feels that identity is the new key. I agree with him that identity is, but I agree that identity is only a part of it. And the other part of it is the whole problem of when you look at some of these critical infrastructure or other recommendations out there, they say you have to be able to see everything on your network in IT, OT, in any world out there. You have to be able to see it. If you can see it, then we can patch it. If you can see it, then the hackers can see it too. And I mean, this isn't obvious whether it's inside or outside. The other approach is to bury it somewhere and pretend it doesn't exist. And that doesn't solve any problems either because now it's sitting there vulnerable. And somebody's eventually going to find it. So we have the ability to say, look, we can get you to anywhere. We can get you to any application. We can give you these factors. So identity is the key. But we all have to do this together. And so what we've really done is said, as an example, a shared account. How many of you know of an application out there that has a shared account? Same password, same username, right? How do you individually identify the individual, say that 10 times fast, that access that application? You can't, right? What we actually do is take, remember we have the MFA built into the thing, so now Bob wants to come in, he's a contractor. Bob wants to come in at a given time, we've set the enforcement. Bob wants to come in and we can basically manage his device or check his device or posture anything on that platform. He now comes in, MFAs. Remember I said if you take and you draw a line down things? This is in effect where we're drawing the line if you take that zero trust box that I showed you with policy on it. The user half is here on the front end. So we've taken the user, brought him in and said, we're checking you, we're validating you, we're validating everything on the front half. That is you. Remember I can tell you who you are, but I don't know if you're good or bad. Okay? It's also the untrusted part. We've given them, as we said, we have to have some level of trust. So we've given them trust here. Okay? Over here, what we've done is we've taken and said, well, that user account that has the passwords in it and the usernames on that system, all of this resides in your premise. We have nothing in our cloud. Nothing. I've had a guy call me up and say, I lost the administrative password of our platform, what do I do? And I said, either find it or rebuild it. No, there's got to be one. I'm like, no. He goes, no, how much can I pay you to make that happen? And I was like, you can't pay me. You guys have to have a backdoor. I'm like, we don't have a backdoor. And he got ticked off because we didn't have a backdoor. I'm like, it's in your environment. It's yours. Everything there is you. We don't have access to it. And so in this vault is that credential with the username, password, all the stuff we need. And so what we do is we take this asset back here that now we have that was before John Smith, and the password was John Smith, because there are some systems out there that seem like that, unbelievably. And what we do is we say, on the front half, we're going to allow the user to get to this through a web UI. Remember, nothing installed, no change to their environment is our vision. And now in the back half, when he launches that application on his interface of the UI, wherever he is, even internally. So we have people that say, I don't want anybody to get to the control systems. Great. We can get you through our platform. Completely high availability to the architecture. I now take the user to that application. He functionally does his job. And when he logs out, number one, I can have a recording. Number two, I can have him supervised. There's a myriad feature that new. But when I go to my audit logs, which is one of the components here, it shows this individual user here as the user of that resource. And he never got to touch these. So we've now lessened the attack surface. Now people would say to me, well, on the back end, they can go right up and do this. I'm like, anything's possible in our world. Because if we truly believed in zero trust and digital trust, tell me if we're ever going to get to zero. And we know we're not. But at least now I can take from an auditability standpoint and give this person true multi-factor, true application access, true limiting capabilities, policy enforcement into the infrastructure. Same thing here. We've got multiple accounts where you can take multiple accounts and federate them. And so we have Okta and other things out there that say, I've got all these. That's great. We'll use them. We'll pull them in. And we will now give you that strong identity on the front. And people say, well, isn't this weakening things? I'm like, well, guess what? If you're going to trust these things without us bringing them in one unified point so we can audit, comply, and do everything for you, sort of gives you that little extra level, doesn't it? Because now we're your single point of access. So we can do this, and this is what we call federation. And so now we can take all these different assets, wherever they are, and pull them together and federate that identity. And so this is basically where we look, and I love these slides that say, here's quantified risk. Can't see the number on the other side there. Trust me, it's not zero. But if we have an example here of a user connecting from China, which I've been in these scenarios, an order processing mechanism, all orders made through this. If you look down here, this is a high risk. If you look over here, you have a contract with a managed device, opens a ticket, malfunction printer, the support system can take that ticket and move through the process. Right? You're looking at saying, where's the level of trust? You will always trust somebody on the right-hand column more. These are two totally different scenarios. But what we're saying to you is, your users are everywhere. The devices are everywhere. Their applications are everywhere. So we're sitting here saying, example one is really bad because it's China. We can geolocate in our platform too and say, first off, he's not getting in. Second off, we can say, whether it's an unmanaged device or a managed device, we can handle that as well. So we've got those two that are a lesson for you. Next stop down about the IT ticket and processing, it doesn't matter what the application is. We have that managed. And now, we don't have any of your data. So realistically, these two scenarios here are great to show you that, to us, the factors that are implied in these numbers realistically are based on what? As he said, trusting. And basically that little I part that is not there, the integrity. And so what we try to do is give you that integrity into the platform. We're not going to tell you the user's perfect. We're not going to tell you the MFA is perfect. We're not going to tell you anything in this is perfect. What we're going to tell you, though, is that we give you that single point to manage all these now, as opposed to the disparate resources everywhere, and to add a level of security on top of this without changing everything. And so that's realistically what we're doing. And this, honestly, is our UI. And so you can get to any resource on here from your UI, internal, external. You can even get to initial applications. You want to get to somebody doing an RDP and block the rest of the system? Do it. So cloud's great. It's great for a lot of things. On-premise is there. It's great for a lot of things. Here we are with ZTA saying, what are we going to do for these federal entities and agencies that need help? We're going to make it simple for them. We're going to put the best of technology products in combined with what we have in ours and allow them to functionally do their jobs. And so when I look at this, everybody says, well, what are the numbers? Talk to the sales guys. Talk to the real people that are the bean counters, because I can tell you that you save money doing this, and I talked to somebody last week and said, you know, we save money and you don't have to do this project because, yeah, but all my boss says now that they'll have more time to surf the web. I can't solve that problem. I'm not going to say, well, how much does it cost you to have them surf the web? It's not my job. My job is to tell you that we can mitigate the risk, mitigate and reduce the risk of an event or an incident. And that's literally, a lot of people don't even know the difference between those two, which is kind of scary. You increase your total cost of ownership. You increase your ROI and improve your process. Because now if you have one unified choke point to go through things, we can do this. Have we asked you to change anything? And last, we give you improved threat detection and audit reporting because you have a single source. Those one-to-many accounts as an example there. You tell me how you can audit those. as a many account. That's like me, when I remember when I was working at a bank and the FBI and CIA showed up at my desk after a bombing and said, we want anything from your IDS log files from this date. And I said, what are you looking for? And they said, anything you have. And I said, that's like telling me to go out to the thruway and saying, when you see a red car, let us know. I'm like, what type of red car? Well, just let us know about every red car. Until you can quantify that data, it's meaningless, it's noise. And so these are all the stuff that we can do. As I said, everything in the platform right there without a change to your environment. And because of where I've come from, we are CIS hardened. We can actually run in a Docker. We've actually run this at a show on a Raspberry Pi. Any type of infrastructure, on-premise, anywhere, totally outbound connection. This to us is what ZTA means, and our company actually was struggling with ZTA because everybody goes, I'm sick of hearing ZTA people. And I said, that's great, let's talk about 800.207, and they're like, well, what's that? Change the paradigm, change the conversation. Any questions, or is that, yes?
For the ID proxy, like you already showed the web, or legacy web application with a local password. But what about for SSH? Is there a proxy for SSH using passwords and keys and certificates that you can?
And in fact, one of the things we don't show, because this is not about us, it's about applying the principles of what we do to this. We actually have people, so it's a web browser based, but you can do native access as well. So I can take old applications, SSH or PuTTY or something on your desktop. I can give you for that session a one-time key that on your desktop you put into your PuTTY or whatever tool you want for RDP, and you can get active SSH access to that environment with private keys held in the background. So the user never gets the keys, he gets the tool he wants on his desktop, and we've only gone through 443. Totally MFA'd, totally identified as the individual user without changing your internal resource. That's people, process, technology is what we're really doing. Any other questions, or?
Thank you very much, Ken. That was awesome. I really appreciate that.
Very welcome. They say they save the best for last. The guy juggling knives and swords will come up next. That's definitely not me.